do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The Indiana Pacers are heading towards what might be the most consequential offseason in recent team history. Since trading Paul George, the Pacers have been stuck in the middle. Not quite bad enough to have a really good draft pick, but not quite good enough to be a real title contender either. And with finances hurting because of the pandemic and the Pacers playing in a small market, many are considering whether or not the Pacers should trade off some of their pieces in order to shed salary. With a roster that doesn't quite fit together and their star on an expiring contract, there might be some big shakeups coming to the Pacers this offseason. Welcome back everybody, it's Courtside TV, and today we're going to be talking about the Indiana Pacers. Now, Victor Oladipo's name has come up a lot in trade rumors this offseason, and I think it's certainly possible that he gets moved. He's on an expiring contract at $21 million a year, and he's coming off that major injury, that ruptured patella that he had a couple of seasons ago. He hasn't looked like the same player working his way back from that injury, but he's still only about a year removed from it, a little more than a year removed from that major injury, and so him working his way back and playing the last couple months of the regular season and in the bubble, he certainly wasn't in his best shape quite yet. I don't think he was quite fully recovered from it. So now next season, he'll be another year removed from that injury and he'll be more back into the player that we know. But there's always the chance that he doesn't turn back into the Victor Oladipo that we saw, who made the All-Star game and, was on track to be a perennial All-Star before that injury. And so on an expiring contract, at a $21 million, that's a pretty palatable number for a lot of contenders to trade for, as well as him coming off that injury. His value is pretty low right now, so there are a lot of contenders who I could definitely see taking a chance on Oladipo. Specifically, the Lakers, the Warriors, and the Nets are teams that come to mind who could potentially try to trade for a third star to take some scoring pressure off of their other two guys. I think that would make sense for all three of those teams. Now, Oladipo, there is certainly some risk involved with trading for him because we don't know what he's going to look like with that injury, as well as him being on an expiring contract means he could easily leave in free agency the following offseason, and so there is some risk involved there. But as far as a player of his caliber who made an All-Star team not too long ago, is not too expensive, and if he doesn't look the same, it's not a huge financial commitment, and so you can make the argument that it's actually not a very risky move because of all of those things. You can bring him in for cheap, and if it doesn't work out, then that's fine. And so there's some risk reward to be calculated here with a potential Oladipo trade, and I certainly think that the Pacers will listen to offers for him. I'm not sure how much value they'll actually get back if they do decide to trade him. They could potentially be looking for draft picks or young players, but you're not going to get as much value for him as you would have a couple of years ago, unfortunately. And so we will have to see if the Pacers decide to move off of Oladipo. There have been a lot of rumors about him being unhappy, wanting to be traded to a real contender, and so we'll have to see if anything materializes from that. And then beyond Oladipo, this roster is filled with a lot of guys who are pretty good, but none of them are really perennial all-star level players. I know Sabonis made the all-star team this year. I don't view him as an all-star every single season type of guy. Realistically, any four of these players could maybe make an all-star team if they were hot. And these are all, players who are on the bubble. They're pretty good, each making a sizable amount of salary, but none of them are enough to really put you over the hump as a title contender. And so for that reason, I think it's possible that we see multiple of these players shopped around in trades this offseason. If you're looking at these four, I think the one that's most likely to stay is Domantas Sabonis. He just signed a big extension. He's got 4 years left on this big deal at about $19-20 million a season average. And I think that makes sense. He's still young, still getting better. He's great offensively, has good size. And so Sabonis is, I think, a guy that they will like to hold on to and build around. And that kind of leaves Myles Turner as the odd man out. They have experimented with their two big lineup, having one of them come off the bench. They've shuffled it around, done a couple of different things. But I think it's most likely that they do decide to move off of Myles Turner this offseason. He's got 3 years left on his contract, all at an even $18 million a year. There have been a lot of trade rumors around him, potentially to the Golden State Warriors into their trade exception. There's a couple of other teams that might be interested in having a center like the Boston Celtics or whoever else. But I think it's likely that they do explore a trade for Turner this offseason in order to free up some more minutes for Sabonis. And then Brogdon has about $20 million on his contract for 3 more years. He is another guy who is a good piece, but not really a build-around type piece. I think he makes sense on this team. I think he is likely that they will keep him. But at 27 years old and with a couple years left on that larger salary, maybe there is a chance that they move him in order to cut some salary out and potentially get some younger pieces in order to build around. But we will have to see what they do with Brogdon. Certainly some contenders would like to get their hands on him. I think they'll probably keep him this offseason, but there's always a chance he gets moved. And then TJ Warren as well, who had a very strong showing in the bubble at around $12 million a season for his next 2 years. He is another guy who would fit well on a lot of contenders, and he would be certainly sought after if he was available on the trade market. Now, I don't know if they'll trade him as well, but we will just have to see what they decide to do. Now, if the Pacers are cutting salary, I think it makes sense to trade Turner and trade TJ Warren, potentially for draft picks and younger players in order to reshape this roster. But I think really the only player who is safe here, or as safe as you can be on a team like this, is probably Sabonis. And then Brogdon after that. And so we will have to see what they decide to do, but I am anticipating major shakeups from the Pacers this offseason. Out of these four and Oladipo that I just mentioned, I would not be surprised if 3 of them were traded this year, and we will just have to see what they do. So looking at the cap sheet, it looks like they pretty much have the option to run this team back. Now, like I've mentioned, I don't believe that they will. I think trades are coming, but pretty much everybody is signed for next season. And I kind of already mentioned salary numbers for some of their top players. But if you're looking at it, you have a guy like Justin Holiday, who's a free agent. He was pretty good for them this year. At 31 years old, I think it makes sense to bring him back, especially just to keep him alongside Aaron Holiday, his brother. They can continue playing together. I think it makes sense for them to re-sign Justin Holiday on another vet minimum deal if he would be willing to take that. Jakar Sampson and Elise Johnson, neither of them really played much. Jakar Sampson did play a little bit in some of the seeding games in the bubble, but I think they don't really care about those two guys. Those are not super consequential. And then beyond that, they don't really have any other free agents. And so really the major shakeups this offseason are going to come from the trade market. I do want to mention also Jeremy Lamb and Doug McDermott, who are guys that are also making a decent amount of salary who could be thrown into trades. Jeremy Lamb probably will not play next year because of the major injury that he suffered. I believe it was a torn ACL, MCL, PCL, pretty much everything in his knee, just totally destroyed his knee, which really sucks. And that's going to be a long rehab for him. And so potentially getting off of his money in a trade, I don't know what you would even possibly get back. Nobody's going to trade for an injured player like that. But if you could somehow throw that money into another deal or something else in order to try to get off that salary, I would assume that the Pacers would try to do that if they are cutting cash. Doug McDermott as well is on an expiring $7 million deal. He would be a nice throw into any other trade, or potentially just a contender who needs another shooter would be willing to bring him in at that number. And so those are other guys who could also be shopped around this offseason. And so I really am anticipating major shakeups from this roster. And then it might just be a complete teardown and another try to build around Domantas Sabonis, and then still developing your young talent such as Goga Bitadze and Aaron Holiday, and then whatever you get in the draft, as well as whatever pieces you can get back from trading off some of these veterans. And so those are things that the Pacers will certainly have to consider this offseason. And so that's really where the major shakeups are going to come, not from free agency, but from the trade market. And so if I was the Pacers, I would first start looking for a trade for Victor Oladipo, try to see what you can get back for him in terms of young talent and draft picks. And then as well, I would be shopping Myles Turner in order to try to give Sabonis the reins to be a full-time starting center, and let Myles Turner kind of get to another team that could use him a little bit more, where he fits a little bit better, and get, again, draft picks and young talent back. And then I would be looking to potentially add a little bit more wing depth in the draft. After giving up on Oladipo, you're going to need another wing, especially if they do also elect to trade TJ Warren. You're going to be looking for more wing depth. I think you're fine at guard with Brogdon, and you have some decent backups in TJ McConnell and others, Aaron Holiday as well. And then at big, you're fine with Sabonis and Bitadze, maybe potentially stepping into a bigger role next year. And so just looking for more depth around the edges, and then just young talent, guys who can play more. and develop. And then in the draft, I would be targeting those wing players as well, more shooting potentially, especially for trading off of Warren. And so that's really what I would be trying to do, is potentially trading off veterans for younger pieces. I think is really the best route the Pacers can go, because in my opinion, the worst place to be in the NBA is in the middle. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, the Pacers were really not quite bad enough to have a high draft pick, but they weren't ever quite good enough to really contend. And you can point to, injuries and things like that as reasons why they lost in the playoffs over the past couple of years. But really, I think this roster, their ceiling isn't as high as they would like it to be with the current construction. And so I think the best thing they can do is just acquiring young talent in order to be good again in the next couple of years. Now, they did hire a new head coach, Nate Bjorkgren, I think is how you say it. I don't really know. Nobody really knows anything about this guy. He was an assistant with the Raptors, I know, for a couple of years. But beyond that, I know he coached in the G League, was with a couple of amateur teams. But nobody really knows anything about him. I'm sure the Pacers were very impressed with his interviews, which is why they hired him. And sometimes these coaches that come out of nowhere can end up being the best option. I'm sure that the Pacers were sold on him for whatever their vision is for this team moving forward. We can't really gain anything from the news of that coach hiring, just because we don't really know what this team is going to look like next year, and so we don't really know what Bjorkgren is, what his view is, and his vision for the team moving forward is, because we just really don't know what ownership is going to do and what kind of a coach he is. So we will just have to see how everything goes down with that. But I did want to mention that they did hire their new head coach, and so that's pretty much my thoughts on the Pacers. Like I mentioned, I think their best course of action is kind of not do a complete teardown, because I do think they should keep Sabonis and probably Brogdon as well. But trading off some of those other veterans in exchange for picks and young players, I think makes sense. And so that's going to be it for my video on the Pacers. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back in the next couple of days, continuing to go through all 30 teams in their offseason preview. So this has been the Indiana Pacers, and I'll see you guys in the next one.